Thousands of crimes of violence in Britain are going unpunished, even murder.
We need to shut her up. They did. That's what they did.
They're committed by those closest to the victims, their families. Some blame their own communities for failing to confront this abuse.
Not to demonstrate real leadership on this is extremely irresponsible, it's morally wrong and it's morally blind.
No one knows how many women in Britain are being silenced by so-called honour.
There's no place for multicultural sensitivity. This is something that we cannot tolerate.
A mother remembers a teenage daughter killed by her young boyfriend for shaming his family. It happened in Rotherham.
It's still as raw now as what it was then. I try not to think about the attack because I don't know actually what was done to her. I try to blank that out.
Laura's killer was just 17, an Asian born and raised here. But when she challenged his traditional culture, Laura had to be silenced. He was found guilty of her murder last year.
He never shown remorse, never, never.
In multicultural Britain today, many young people from immigrant communities are well integrated. Yet in many households, old traditions are still a powerful force, and some cause harm.
Up and down the country, behind closed doors, crimes are being committed. Kidnap and false imprisonment. Women and girls being beaten, raped, and even murdered, and all in the name of so-called honour. The authorities admit that they just don't know the real scale of this abuse.
Hello, Carmen Ivana, can I help?
Oh, hi, I wonder if you can help me. I'm just seeing a lady who's been referred to our service, who is receiving direct threats from her family and to kill her.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a national helpline for those being threatened and suffering domestic violence because of honour. The helpline was set up by a Sikh brought up in Derby, Jasvinder Sangera.
I was never allowed to walk these streets on my own. We always were chaperoned wherever we went because there was always the fear of dishonour in the family.
Jasvinder was 14 when she was imprisoned in her bedroom for refusing to marry a man she'd never met. She ran away from home and the code of honour, which still rules here.
What we have are families living next to each other. They all become the eyes and the ears of the community, and they will all be involved in the honour system.
In South Asian and Middle Eastern communities, controlling the behaviour of women is seen as the key to the family's honour.
I was conditioned to learn that from a very young age. It is dishonourable to make eye contact with men, sit with men, and the rules shift and change as you get older. You're not allowed to have boyfriends, be seen talking to the opposite sex, cut your hair, wear makeup. You are taught these are all dishonourable acts of behaviour, and what you understand as a young person is if you engage in this behaviour, you will put yourself at risk. They can be triggers for significant harm, a forced marriage, or even murder.
Calls to the Honour Helpline have doubled in the 4 years since it was set up.
The 500 calls a month we're currently receiving, from my perspective, is a drop in the ocean. There are hundreds and thousands out there we've yet to reach.
One of the volunteers here, Naina, was disowned by her own family. She'd run away from her husband who beat her. She's still afraid of showing her face.
Every time he hit me, he used to have an excuse, because the first thing he said was, she swore at me or she raised her voice to me. And my parents would say, why did you raise your voice? You know, you kind of deserved it. For them to be disowned in society is like an honour thing for them. It's easier to sacrifice a daughter or a son than it is to sacrifice a society or your extended family who you're trying to please all the time.
What did you think would happen? Did you fear you might be killed?
A lot of times. Even now, you know, my dad already said it to me. Do you know, if you leave him, then you're going to make me do something that I don't want to do.
No one knows how many honour crimes there are in this country. The latest survey of police force statistics found over 2,800 a year. That's nearly 8 a day. And that doesn't even include a quarter of forces who didn't respond. This is one of a handful of refuges in this country just for Asian women and their children. Everyone here has run away from a husband's home, where his extended family and honour have made their lives a misery.
So many times my husband beat me up. He never listened to me, he always listened to my mother-in-law.
So he was physically violent to you?
Yeah, he was physically violent to me, even my mother-in-law as well, and my sister-in-law as well. They always, you know, they disrespect me. They're just like, they treat me like this. I have no honor, I have no respect. I'm just like a slave. That's it.
Many of these women come from Pakistan as young brides. Their passports are taken away. They become virtual prisoners, not even allowed to learn English, like Kawal.
My mother-in-law hit me so hard in the face that blood poured from my ear. I didn't know anything about the outside world. I couldn't speak the language. I didn't know anything about money. They kept me a prisoner in the house. Once I was locked in the upstairs bedroom for 13 days. I thought the only way I'm going to get out is through the upstairs window or by killing myself. I just wanted to end it all.
Nationally, the police response to honour crime has been patchy. Serious mistakes have been made. A murder detective at the Metropolitan Police has had to learn what honour killing in Britain is all about.
Heshu stabbed multiple times, Samara 18 times. In every single one of these cases, they involve extreme violence because the murders are committed to send a message to the wider community. But quite often there are multiple perpetrators. So a degree of high organisation, quite often precipitated by a family meeting.
It was a family meeting that sealed the fate of Banaz Mahmood. She was a 19-year-old Iraqi Kurd who'd been allowed to leave her violent husband.
But when Banaz started secretly seeing someone else and was spotted kissing him outside this tube station in South London, it was too much for the family's honour. They called a meeting of close relatives at their home and they decided to kill her.
This is a letter that was written by Banaz Mahmood and handed into the police station on the 12th of December. And in this letter she names some of the people whom she has heard are going to be responsible for her murder.
She knew who was threatening her?
She had been told who the people were who were going to be responsible for killing her. And the people that she named in there are the people who have been convicted for her murder.
This video of Banaz was taken by her boyfriend in hospital after her father first attempted to kill her. But Banaz wouldn't press charges. The police didn't recognise the danger she was in, and she went home.
What happened on that night was that the police were called, but the officer that turned up simply didn't understand what it was that she was being told. She had no prior knowledge of honour-based violence and simply didn't believe, in all fairness, what it was that she was being told. The police clearly did fail Banaz on that occasion.
A month later, Banaz went missing. A murder hunt was launched. Her uncle and father had been detained, but there was no hard evidence against them.
All our efforts focused on trying to find Banaz's body, and we literally lived and breathed and slept trying to find her.
Yeah, I've got the ground crew, got the address, just looking now.
Banaz's body was found in the garden of this house, over 100 miles from her home where she'd been murdered. Her relatives had been secretly recorded, boasting of where they'd hidden her.
After digging for the whole day, we finally discovered Banaz's body, buried 6 feet deep underneath actually under the footings of a house. We've gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure that we didn't find her.
It took 5 years, even trips to Iraq, to extradite and bring all Banaz's relatives responsible for her murder to justice. Banaz Mahmoud's case was a watershed. It made police and prosecutors realize how serious honor crime had become in this country.
We don't know the true figure of honor killings. It's anything between 10 and 12 a year in this country. I don't know how many other unmarked graves there are in our green and pleasant land. I don't know. And that suggests to me that we're underestimating this issue.
There are thousands of women in Britain today who live in silence, in fear of their lives because of honor. We can't show you the face of this young Kurdish woman. Layla came here to join her husband, who turned out to be violent and unstable.
He put his hands round my throat. He said he would kill me and cut me into pieces and put me in a rubbish bag. No one would even know you were in this country, he said. Even the police wouldn't know about you. There was no reason for him to threaten and insult me. He said to me, "When I see you, it makes me crazy. When I beat you up, it makes me feel better."
Layla ended up in hospital with serious injuries. But she was pregnant and went back to her husband. Things got worse and she ran away. But leaving her husband hasn't ended the threat to her life.
The dishonourable thing I did was to go into a refuge, because in Kurdistan, a refuge is seen as a very bad place.
Some women cannot escape abusive marriages. The only way out is to silence themselves. Suicide rates among South Asian women in Britain are 3 times the national average.
It's quite stunning statistics when you realise, in fact, there's only one other group which has that similar figure, and that's soldiers who return from the war zones of Iraq and Afghanistan, because they themselves, these women, are living in war zones themselves. They can think of no other way in which to get away from their situation without dishonouring their family in some way, shape or form than killing themselves.
When Nosheen Azam got married in Pakistan and came to live in Sheffield, she thought she'd be happy.
This is my daughter.
But her father says Nosheen was soon calling home, saying her husband and in-laws were mistreating her. He told her not to leave, for the sake of the family's honour.
I told her that the best daughters are the ones who stay in their marital homes until the day they die. The truth is that no man, no Muslim, wants their daughter's marriage to end in divorce, for them to have to come back home.
But things got worse. Nosheen left home 3 times and went to other relatives in Sheffield, but was persuaded to go back to her husband. Then one day she rang her parents in Pakistan with a chilling warning.
Nosheen said, "Did you sell me to them for money? When you see me next, I won't be alive. I'll be dead."
An hour later, the new bride was found on fire in her garden. Her burns are too horrific to show without blurring the photograph. Mr. Azam came to England. Every day he visits Nosheen in a nursing home. She suffered a massive brain hemorrhage and has never been able to reveal what really happened.
She's lifeless, like a living corpse. She can't talk, can't walk, she can't eat. She's the living dead. The most painful thing for us is that our daughter, who is so young, has been wasted.
The circumstances are vague. We don't know for sure whether she tried to commit suicide or whether somebody tried to kill her.
Sheffield police have told Mr. Azam and the women's group helping him there's no evidence anyone else was involved, so they can't take the case any further. The police believe Nosheen set herself alight. It was a cry for help, but her father wants an inquiry.
मुझे तो इंसाफ चाहिए किसी दरवाजे से मिल जाए क्योंकि मेरी बेटी ज़ाया हो रही है इसलिए मुझे इंसाफ चाहिए.
It's unclear what happened to Nosheen, but campaigners say there are cases where women unable to escape have resorted to suicide. They want to see those responsible held to account.
People who drive others to harm themselves in context of violence and abuse and bullying and harassment and intimidating and threatening behavior are just as much culpable as if they were carrying out the murder themselves.
There's little sign that the desire to preserve the honour of the family at all costs is changing, even with the younger generation. Here in Rotherham, one love story across the racial divide has had a tragic ending.
Laura Wilson was only 17, a strong-willed girl whose behaviour would trigger her murder.
Feisty. She had got a mouth on her. If she got something to say, she'd say it.
Laura lived in Ferrum Park, a mixed white and Asian community. She was only a teenager, but she'd already had a baby by an Asian man, Ishaq Hussain, known as Zach. He'd refused to recognise the child. But the boy Laura really loved was his friend, 17-year-old Ashtiaq Ashkar.
Ashtiaq were her first love. She absolutely adored him, and she would always on phone to him and he would on phone to her.
Already stung by Zach's rejection of their child, when Ashtiaq jilted Laura, she wasn't going to just accept it.
She decided to go and see Ashtiaq's family and Zach's family and tell them that she had relationships with both of them.
This is the area of Ferrum with the terraced houses. Ashtiaq's houses is one of those on the main road.
Detective Mick Mason took me to the area where Laura confronted the men's families.
Well, their reactions were quite vocal. An argument broke out. One of the mothers tried to hit Laura with a shoe. Laura coming around's not welcome in the Pakistani community. There was a number of meetings between two men, and we believe then that it was decided that Laura had to be stopped.
Three days after confronting the families, Laura met Ashtiaq down by the canal. He'd sent her a text. He wanted to see her, alone.
And this is the way that Laura had come from down by the railings down there.
It was dark by the time Laura met Ashtiaq down by the canal. Then she got a phone call from her mother.
I asked her where she were, and I said, it's about time you got home. She said, oh, not be long, and that was it.
That was the last you heard from her?
The last I heard from her.
Within minutes, the police believe, Ashtiak began a frenzied knife attack on Laura before throwing her into the canal.
I've seen many, many murders, but this one was the worst I've seen. The pathologist in court actually said that Laura had a number of stab wounds to the crown of the head. He believed that Laura had been subject to stabbing while she was actually trying to get out of the canal. The knife had been used to physically stop her getting out of the canal.
When Laura's body was found, Ashtiak and Zach were arrested and tried for her murder.
I think it was about honour and about shame, is that Laura, in their eyes, had brought shame on the family by coming round, and their sons had clearly brought shame on the family as well.
Ashtiak was found guilty of killing Laura and sentenced to 17 years in prison. Zach was acquitted.
Yeah, I do honestly think it was an honour killing. Putting shame on the family because she needed to be shut up. They need to shut her up. And they did. That's what they did.
What happened to Laura Wilson shows that honour can be just as important to young people born and brought up here as it is to their parents.
I thought this was a generational thing. It was something that would die out with my generation. Unfortunately, I've come across very young people who think the same way. One example, a young man, 20 years old, he said to me, "Nazir, don't you understand?" He said, "Man is a piece of gold." He said, "Woman is a piece of silk. If you drop a piece of gold in mud, you can wipe it clean. But if you drop a piece of silk in mud, it's stained forever." That is his view of women. That is why he thinks that women must be controlled, that their behaviour cannot be allowed to just go unchecked. And so that's a 20-year-old.
To find out more about the attitudes of the younger generation, we carried out an opinion poll of young Asians, men and women. Over 2/3 agreed families should live according to the concept of honour. Interestingly, the younger age group, between 16 and 24, felt more strongly about it. At first, only 6% of the total said it was right to physically punish a woman who brings dishonour on her family. But that went up to 18%, nearly 1 in 5, when presented with a specific list. Disobeying a father, marrying someone unacceptable or wanting to end a marriage. Young Asian women are just as likely as men to say they should be punished. The key to changing attitudes to honour lies in education. Boys need to be taught what's unacceptable, girls to know they don't have to suffer in silence. The campaigner Jasvinder Sangera approached 100 schools before finding this one, prepared to let her in to talk about this sensitive issue.
Why don't schools want you to go and talk to them?
It's the same old thing. We don't want to offend communities. We don't want to touch on and tread on cultural toes. You know, these excuses because they've been trained to be culturally sensitive.
1/3 of children here are from ethnic minorities. Jasvinder tells them her own story.
I came home from school, I was 14. My mother sat me down and she presented this photograph to me. And she said, "Jasvinder, this is the man you are going to marry." And I said, "But Mum, I want to finish school." She said, "No, where you're going, you don't need an education, you're going to get married."
This school already has some experience of the forced marriage and honour abuse she's describing.
We have seen issues where children have had to be supported into refuges, escaping difficult situations at home. Children have not returned from holidays abroad, situations where we've supported children on their route to education because it has been an alternative to perhaps pressure to be married.
It's important to have a debate and to ask questions.
The majority of experts argue that the root cause of honour crime lies in forced marriage.
A forced marriage is where your family cross the line, you're saying no, and they're forcing you to do it. That's abuse. That's child abuse. It's wrong. And sometimes what we also
The government is now considering making forced marriage a criminal offence.
on a one-to-one.
There are probably about 10,000 of those a year in this country every year. So we're looking at a substantial problem, and we're just, I think, scratching the surface. Forced marriage is the earthquake, and what's followed is a tsunami of domestic abuse, sexual abuse, child protection issues, suicide and murder. And so if we can tackle forced marriage, then we can prevent all these other things from happening.
But the signs so far have not been encouraging.
3 years ago, all public agencies in this country, thousands of organisations, were given these statutory guidelines in order to tackle forced marriage and honour abuse. But in a recent review, only 81 even responded. The government admits it's disappointing, shows inconsistency and a lack of commitment.
Considering that she is a minor and she's 15, it's really important that they do become involved in order to keep her safe.
The Honour Helpline receives dozens of calls a week about young girls at risk.
The parents have found a text message in her phone and they believe the text message to have been from a boy. They'd actually beaten her and kept her off school, and there's talk of her going to Pakistan in the half-term holidays.
And what might happen to her in Pakistan?
She's concerned that when she goes to Pakistan she'll be married.
Jasvinder is still fighting reluctance in some quarters to face the problems caused by the Honour Code.
I've yet to see community leaders, religious leaders, Asian councillors, politicians give real leadership on this. They don't, because they know it makes them unpopular. They know this is happening, and to know that significant abuse in your communities is happening and not to demonstrate real leadership on this is extremely irresponsible, it's morally wrong and it's morally blind.
Those who are trying to tackle it say all honour crimes must be confronted.
It needs to be said that the vast majority that we see involve the Muslim community, of which I'm a member. My view is that there's no place for multicultural sensitivity in this situation. This is something that we cannot tolerate. The moment that I stop looking at a community because somebody tells me it's too sensitive is the moment I pack up my file and walk out the door.
But until young men reject violence in the name of honour, others will die.
Everybody misses her. We can't fetch her back.
And until more families speak out against the dangers of honour, women will continue to suffer in silence.
My daughter may have been burnt, but I don't want this to happen to anyone else's daughter.
For details of organisations which offer advice and support, go online to the Panorama website or call the BBC Action Line to hear recorded information on